Thank you, Laura, and thanks for everyone for being here. I'm Susan Vroman, and as Laura said, I worked for over 20 years in a professional capacity in in corporate America, if you will, before going back to school. And when I did, only less than 20%, about 18% of the population had any sort of flex work in their environment. So flexible time, flexible space, hybrid was not even a thing. And I wrote my dissertation on how flexible supportive behaviors by supervisors could help with flexible work. So the support of a manager and how that would help for folks to feel comfortable working remotely. And by the time I came out, I had all of about 5 or 6 months before the world went remote, and 80% was the top number that we hit for flexible work. So I was really excited that so much of my research gave me a basis for the conversations that we started to have. Um, what's going on in the world now is kind of like a little ricochet. We're still kind of figuring out what worked, what stuck, what doesn't. And we're all still making do with what we have. So sometimes we're looking at our laptops stacked on books, and sometimes we're all in our most wonderful standing environments. Um, Also, many of us are probably dealing with things like kids running in and out and dogs that are barking. So I'm just going to put out the disclaimers right away. This is summer mode for those of us at Bentley. You're going to see all the above happening in my world. And I appreciate your grace and flexibility in having me as the person speaking with you part of the time. Jeff, do you want to do a little more intro on yourself too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that thank you, Laura and Susan, for sort of the introduction and some more background. I think for me, what really draws me to this topic, and the only thing that I would add is sort of the that I focused primarily. A lot of my research focuses on Generation Z and generational differences, and sort of how hybrid, not specifically the hybrid workforce, but how, leadership and the workplace and everything sort of is impacting younger generations, and how that can lead to miscommunication and everything that we're going to talk about today. So for me, it's really intriguing because we're essentially seeing a lot of, for especially Gen Zers, who are a lot of our students and our coworkers and whatever, wherever they may fall, right, in our life. This isn't particularly abnormal for some of them, but that comes with strengths and weaknesses. So it's fascinating to me to see them sort of explore this world. And like Susan mentioned, now we're sort of in this in between, and sort of where people are coming back and into the workplace. And now, so we may have a situation where an employee has never set foot in the workplace, especially if they are a member of Gen Z. And so that leaves some pretty interesting questions and scenarios. So leads to, I should say. So I think it's a topic that's ripe for discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So what we thought we would do with our session today, it's summer power hour, so we didn't want to do anything too formal, too, presentationally. We thought maybe we could give you some natural energy from me and Jeff, writing together, brainstorming on a bunch of topics. And when we thought about it, what did we do with this article when it came out in Fast Company, the reason that we prompted this, we thought there's a lot of topics on mind. So one of them was like what Jeff just said. So many people in the workforce right now have worked or had worked for years, decades, perhaps even before going remote. And it was a little bit, what is this? There was a big resistance. Again, I mentioned I did a lot of research before that said that only 18% of the population had any flex work before 2020 anyway. And folks who work flexibly were often looked down upon. Oh, that mother, she thinks that her kids are so important. Or, oh, well, I don't have kids and I get penalized because I have to stay here, would be a lot of the common sentiment. Or those who would work remotely wouldn't get training opportunities or they wouldn't get promotion opportunities. And they sure as heck didn't get opportunities like the windshield time with the supervisors and the executives to and from lunch or to and from the airport, that kind of thing. Then the world changed, and we actually saw that there is an entire, a lot of the people in Jeff, your research may have started their job and never went into an office, or, are very comfortable working remotely, whereas other people are saying, I get bored or distracted. Then there's other people who still say, well, those young generations, those whippersnappers, they're not doing enough if I can't see them working. So there's so many mixed emotions. And that just adds fuel to the fire because let's be really honest here. Not everyone is going to do all the right things all the time. And right being in quotes and italics. So that's going to cause some conflict. Um, and then there's the other part where we can simply say that folks are not meaning to do the wrong thing, but they don't know how to do the right thing, and or they think they're doing the right thing, but no one's telling them they're not doing the right thing. At Bentley, what we do, Jeff, is we are helping our students become a force for good. That is our mission. And I know that we're going to have a large cadre of students who are going through. I want to give a shout out to Rick Miller's class because I know that they're going to be watching. They're in a class all about being a responsible leader, that sort of thing. So if we know that we want for folks to be doing the right thing, doing good, part of that is leading the workforce. And if you're going to be leading the workforce, you do need to be mindful of all of your vested parties. What are their interests? What are their needs? What can they do better? How can they do this better? We have found that there are a lot of mistakes being made, both in the people that are doing the work and in setting up a culture. At least that's what I remember. So if we know that we want for folks to collaborate, if we know what we want folks to do their best, if we know that we want folks to be leading great teams or being great team members, um, how can they do this? So I wanted to start off with a question for you, Jeff, if you don't mind.
Of
We've
course.
talked a lot about how Gen Zers maybe haven't even stepped foot in a traditional office or one where everybody's there all of the time, at the very least. What generational dynamics do you see making working together even more complicated in this day and age?
Yeah, so there's a few, and I'll try to go through just sort of give the highlights of some of the main things that I see that sort of come up. One of the big ones that I think that should probably be mentioned is, and maybe start with, is some discomfort, right, with confrontation across the board. I think that that's not unique necessarily to Gen Z. But there is some research that really shows that there is sort of this idea that um, they fear confrontation in some ways, right? Not because they lack confidence. We know that that's any of us that have taught and worked with Gen Zers. That's not always an issue with them, right? But they're very much used to digital conflict, digital communication, right? And where conflict is very filtered, we have time to, when we're talking to somebody via text or whatever it may be, we have time to think, right? We have time to sort of process and use that time to create a response that may be what, sounds ideal. And again, that's not necessarily unique to Gen Z. A lot of us probably take advantage of that. So I think that there's sort of a disconnect in some ways where they find themselves in the workplace and the conflict can't be filtered. Right. They don't have that time to say, and to avoid that, like you meant, like Susan mentioned, speaking in the hallway, taking a ride to the airport, they don't have that sort of buffer in between them that they've become sort of accustomed to. So that I think can sometimes lead to a little bit of an issue. The other thing I did want to mention quickly is that a lot of studies show that the emotional intelligence gap, so to speak, right, and not just from one specific side, right. So we know that Gen Z is a little bit more comfortable and I guess you could say straightforward with naming their emotions, right? And sort of putting that out there. But a lot of people would suggest that they don't always navigate those emotions in the most, I guess you could say, ideal way when we look at a professional setting, right? And so, where a lot of the times older generations, again, not always generalizing here, but often may struggle with that, especially in a professional setting. Oftentimes, again, sort of the idea of showing a particular emotion, whether it's being this has been talked a lot about recently, actually, with I think a member of parliament who showed emotion recently, and shed a few tears or what have you, and was sort of there was a lot of the reaction around it was very interesting because a lot of the from what I was seeing, at least on social, was a lot of the older cohort members of her, group. She was a little bit older. Definitely felt like perhaps she shouldn't have done that, right? Or perhaps it was sort of radical or different. Whereas some younger members of, the individuals that were sort of noticing and looking through things and looking through her reaction felt there wasn't really anything that unique about it, right? It was okay. So again, sort of that disconnect around emotions. There's so many different things I feel like you could continue here, but I'm just going to wrap this up with what I think might be one of the maybe un, you know, sort of, I guess you could combine this together in the idea of clashing definitions of what we consider professionalism, right? And I think we all know that, right? What everything from a baby boomer to a Gen Z to a millennial, everyone has different ideas, Gen X, right, to what might be considered professional. And so you could go on a whole deep dive into what, that looks like. And I think you can tie that in with the unspoken norms, right? In unstructured environments. I think that it's a lot of these um, Generation Z individuals really missed the learning curve. They didn't have the opportunity to learn a little bit about these unspoken norms. And it's hard to blame them, at least in my mind, when they weren't taught, right? And they didn't have the experience to really explore what might be appropriate in an email, right? Or what might be appropriate for even dress codes or something along those lines. And so now there's been a lot of developments in different AI and all sorts of different things. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but to sort of help sort of the skill training in terms of what might be professional and what might not be. Even something as simple as an email prompt, right, could be challenging to somebody from that generation. So those are just a few things I was thinking. But now I wanted to throw it back to Susan because I wanted to ask a little something different, right? So there are so many things, right, to think about from this generational point of view. And I could go on and on and on, and we're not going to bore everybody, and I'm not going to bore anybody, right, and waste all their time. But basically, the job of leaders gets more complicated. That's what I'm hearing from this, right, as I'm listening to myself speak, right? And so you add into the fact that the work needs to get done, right? We can't lower the standards. We can't decide, well, we're just going to adapt and change everything because of this, right? We still have to move on. So, what else do you think, Susan, seems to be causing some tension and conflict in this modern hybrid workplace? I mean, sure, generational, that's an aspect, but it's not the only aspect, right? So,
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Honestly, I was listening, laughing. I don't know the right word for it because as you're saying, this generation that we're going through, they're so comfortable sharing their emotions. And boy, I can tell you how many of my friends, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I can tell you how many of my friends will be like, "Oh, these people, they think I care about what they feel." I'm like, well, yeah. And and oh, they don't seem to know they like vomit out of their mouth in their emails because, well, they don't really know what they're supposed to write. Um, then I heard a whole thing for those of you who are in the Boston area, if you ever listen to NPR, Jim and Marjorie, my favorite people, they were going on and on about how much they don't like grammar. And they're like, why is there even a semicolon? And why do we need apostrophes? And I was like, oh my good Lord. But then they were just like, why don't people know how to use capitals? Okay, so we've got a lot, as you said, a lot that we could possibly be dealing with. But if we do back it up to some of the basic basics, let's go with kind of like the real problem here. If I've never worked with other people, then I have really lost out, I think. And when I worked from home, it is almost impossible for me to say, would you be my mentor? Because I don't know if you like me, and I don't know if I like you. All I know is you look like this face. And I bring this back to my own years of 2020, 2021, 20 when I was teaching. We at Bentley were given the choice of, do you want to come in and do remote? I mean, hybrid modality, or do you want to teach remotely? Now, I had young children at the time. I didn't want to expose myself and the others to the unknowns. So I taught remotely. For a year and a half, I taught remotely. Then I came back to campus and I met students that had big personalities but were very petite in stature, or had very small personalities but were gentle giants. And I was like, I didn't know what to expect. If you don't interact with somebody, the chemistry that you might have online, that's one thing, but it's not the same thing as working with people. And when we don't have that person-to-person interaction, it's very hard to find somebody that you can say, I trust you and I feel comfortable learning from you. And then there's this other part where we were talking about the emotions, the emotional trust. Now, mentoring is going to be the thing that I'm going to say is kind of the biggest thing that we're missing. We're missing the opportunity to learn from somebody that we're watching because we literally shut our monitors off when we're working remotely and we don't know what people are doing after that. I don't know what you look like when you eat or drink. I don't know what you look like when you're walking. I don't know if you are somebody who walks fast or slow, who types or takes notes. And if I'm not able to watch that, I'm not able to see. What is a normal behavior to be doing in a meeting? Am I supposed to have my phone out? Because, I'm not blaming anybody who's doing it, but if you're on this call right now and you're multitasking, that's kind of normal for people who are online. But when we're in a meeting, we're not supposed to do that. So how am I learning if I'm not able to watch and to absorb what one another is doing? Then there's safety and trust. Again, for my generation, I may have been able to walk up to somebody and said, I'd love to learn from you. But a lot of times you would just be brought under somebody's wing. There'd be a casual, hey, do you have some time before lunch? I have another meeting I'd love for you to join for. Or what are you doing for lunch? You want to grab a bite? And I'd like to talk to you about another project that we've got coming up. These would be the informal ways that we would learn from each other and get opportunities for new projects. Or somebody could even say over that lunch, so I noticed during that meeting, it looked like you were just a little distracted. Or do if that's not what you mean to do, may I suggest those little corrective behaviors? When we don't have these in-person interactions, we're missing. We're missing out on learning. We're missing out on the opportunity to learn. Oh, and by the way, another thing of this, not this generation, because I'm going to actually say it's part of my generation, but another piece is that mentoring and sponsoring has to be something that's mutually amenable based on emotional connection. And so it's not comfortable for some people to say, I'd like you to take you under my wing if they don't know you. But if imagine if you've never met somebody and you go to the office and they say, I'd love to give you some opportunities. And you're like, what's this person up to? Like, what's their agenda? I don't know if I'm comfortable with them. Men to men, men to women, women to men, that kind of thing. We may all go, whoa, walls up. So we don't necessarily know how to behave when we're in an environment where we're working together. And that's really going to cause some tension, I think. I wanted to ask you another question, Jeff, and I brought a note down, so don't mind me when my eyes go down. I like to make sure I say, what was I going to ask? But we do know that different generations have different communication norms, like what we were just talking about. I'd love to know how does the fact that leaders and their team members not how does the fact that leaders and team members not seeing each other actually, impacts the interactions? Do conflicts likely fester? What meaning do different generations assign to the conversations that are not had? I guess, in other words, how does the interplay of generational differences complicate workplace conflict even further?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I think, and again, anyone that's worked with anyone of maybe a little bit of a younger generation, and again, we're generalizing, and I always want to put that out there, right? Because you don't want to, you can't, no generation's a monolith, right? So you want to then, be very clear about that. But any of us, especially that teach, right, younger generations or work with younger generations, know that Gen Z is not necessarily the most patient, right? And younger generation, and that's not just them, right? We're becoming less patient as a society, but we know that Gen Z certainly reads silence a little bit differently than perhaps some older generation. I mean, I see this all the time with people of let's say of even Gen X, right? So people that are perhaps, in their 50s or wherever that, ends up landing. For a lot of people, no news is good news, right? The idea that if you haven't heard back yet, perhaps the person's busy, right? The person is waiting to respond. They're, gathering their thoughts, whatever that may be. But we know that with Gen Z, they grew up in a time where everything was constant. Everything was based on likes, reactions, read receipts. So they know when things are being, put off, or when things are being perhaps, you know, delayed, right? And even if they don't know, they may assume it. So for me, I'm always sort of responding to emails, I feel, relatively quickly, because I'll often receive occasionally a follow-up before I've even had a chance to respond to that first email. And it might not even be by the end of the workday. Right. And so I see some nodding heads. So I know that there's some relation, you can feel that. So that can definitely be, and that can lead to conflict, because if you're someone who, just needs a day, right? That was always the norm. At least when I was in college, the norm was usually, give it 24 to 48 hours. Now I think it's drastically shorter, at least unless we communicate clearly that that's not going to be the case. So I think that's, very, very important. And I think, like Susan mentioned, the idea of the walk by, the coffee chat moments, unfortunately, sometimes we don't have that. But I think that I would argue that there are ways to make that happen, right? And ways to intentionally make that happen, even if we're working hybridly. And I think that, again, because younger generations specifically are so open and sort of used and welcome to this world, then it's something that, they may be more willing to try, but it can feel awkward for those who have been in the workplace for 20 years or whatever it may be, and they don't really want to do a virtual cocktail hour or whatever it's called, right? So I definitely could see that. But I think the response time is huge, and I really do think one of the biggest things, and I'm going to ask Susan about this in a second, conflict. But I think one of the issue is all these things, without visual cues, without spontaneous interactions. There's been a lot of talk recently about the Gen Z stare. There's been a lot of Google that, and you'll find multiple, sort of articles that talk a little bit about that. It's not really a new occurrence, but it's getting a lot of talk currently. And so all these things can definitely lead to conflict. And when you're not face to face, obviously that's going to sort of make it a little bit more challenging. And so that's where I kind of wanted to go with my question to Susan was, if we want to sort of present that simmering tension, right? If I have a situation where, a Gen Z employee has sent me 3 emails, right, within the past 3 hours because they need an answer right now. And, maybe I just respond because I want to handle it, but I let it simmer a little bit because I'm a little, aggravated that they're doing this, right? And that they don't see that. So what could you recommend, do you think, that someone could do, to sort of create a culture where conflict isn't necessarily avoided, but it's addressed constructively, and in this sort of hybrid environment, but also perhaps, even if it's totally remote, I wonder if there's any tips that could be added, but especially, I guess, in the hybrid.
Well, yeah, I'm laughing right now because, you and I are teach the same population, and there's some other folks in this call who teach the same population. And almost always when we start up a semester, we put teams together and we say put a team charter together. And students will say, you have a certain amount of time to get back to us before we make a decision. And I always go, well, wait, what if the person's got something else going on in their life? It seems like if I say to them that they should have 24 hours to let somebody get back to the group on a chat, it's like you're waiting for a week. But it's like you have student athletes who might literally be at a game, or people who have jobs who don't actually devote their whole life to being on this student debt.
Absolutely.
So I hear you on that one. And at the same time, I'm a person who likes to do a lot too. So I guess I'm there on that email. But you know what? Let's just start off with the email factor. I would love it if this generation that's coming through right now would actually use their email instead of chat or Snap or whatever. I'm like, so I don't know how fast I'm supposed to work. Yeah, let's go back to that whole basics. If we are teaching our folks to be responsible leaders, then part of that is to set up a culture where folks can thrive, what we've been talking about earlier. And if you're always expected to be on, how in the world can you do that? I just can't. I am the person who takes my entire summer off of social media because I'm so tired. And it has nothing to do with my age. It's just that this is the culture that we live in. So when you're the leader and you have the opportunity to take the con and to say, even if your organization has something else going on, but I want to set up my team culture, that which I am responsible for, what can you do so that we can not avoid conflict, but at least we can make it more comfortable? I say this all the time. I would love for every single leader here who listens to this now, who listens to this on the recording, and if leading means the team that you're leading in a class or leading means you're leading 50 people, think about the people that you work with. List your top five performers, your top five. What do you know about them? Do you know the name of their significant other? Do you know the name of their kids if they have them? Do you know what they like to do on the weekend? Do you know their favorite sports team or their favorite band that they would like love to get a ticket for in case someone popped up? Do you know what their goals are? Do you know what they would like to get involved with? Do you know, are they in school? What else are they doing besides working for you? If you don't know these things about your top five performers, I would venture to say that if we move down to the next five or the next whatever, then the chances are not so good. And if you don't know these things about your top performers, then what's it like to work for you when Coldplay is in town and they had an amazing opportunity to go see it, but you made them work late? God, don't do that, that kind of thing. Or you could be all about, like, I saw Coldplay's coming into town. Did you get tickets? And they'd be like, oh, you know something about me. But that's the first thing. Get to know your people, especially your stars, but quite frankly, get to know everybody. And if you are new to a team, whether you've been brought into the team new or you were promoted and you got a team or you're in a new job, take the time to get to know everybody, please. If this can be in person, that's amazing. So if you have hybrid folks that come into the office, then schedule it out. The next time you're in, we're going to lunch. No talk about work. Just I want to get to know about you. And if they're not, then do exactly. Maybe not comfortable, like you said, Jeff, but honestly, let's just have lunch together. I'll eat on a screen if you eat on a screen. I'm fine with that. Let's just get to know each other. Get to know people as humans. That is the basics, essence, core of anything emotional intelligent is to get to know your people and understand what turns them on and what turns them off. Because when you do that, and when you figure out what it is that turns them off, when they're pissed off, or when they're angry, or when they're festering, or when they're avoiding, or assimilating, or making things, you're going to know it. And that is going to help you as a leader manage through any conflict 1,000 times better than anything else that you and I are going to say today, no matter what. Get to know your people as people. Now, another thing that you need to do after you get to know people as people is also make sure expectations are clear. I cannot underscore this enough. And I think, when I did my TEDx, I was like, this is it. Like, what are the parameters? What do we need for people to know what are the expectations and how are they going to be held accountable? If this is not clear, it is very unlikely anybody will be successful because they don't know what success looks like. They don't know when they've hit their marks. They'll be clamoring and clamoring and clamoring as much as they can. They'll be making themselves look busy because they think you need, and all you're looking for is for them to hit their mark, then great. But otherwise, conflict is going to happen because they don't know and or they get frustrated. I'm working all the time. Why isn't this person working? Well, I don't need them to work all the time. I don't need you to work all the time. I just need the work to get done. I'm wearing my professional big boy clothes. Well, that person wears their tennis shirt. Oh, so sorry. You know what? I don't care if you wear your pajamas, or I do. Like, what are they looking for? How can success be attained? And on the converse, what happens when I don't do it? Because quite frankly, if I get stopped when I'm speeding on the highway, I should know that's coming. I understand there's a speed limit and there's a consequence. And so it doesn't hurt for the cop to pull me over. No manager is going to want to correct their team and stop progress if people are not sure that that's supposed to happen. They're going to say, "Oh, I'm going to make people upset." But if you know what is expected of you and what the consequence might be if you don't attain that or if you're not adhering to that, then honestly, it's kind of a problem. So make it clear, manage to it. Conflicts don't really happen. People just accept the fact that they didn't do the right thing and they're going to accept the consequence. Make it not clear, don't be sure of the consequence. It's going to probably cause chaos. That's what's said. So those things, get to know your people, clarify expectations, and also clarify accountabilities. Those would be what I would say to set up that first climate. Hopefully, I don't know if that makes sense. But that's just the basics. If we want to shift it and we want to look at through the paradigm of inquiry of generational approaches, Jeff, this is where you're the expert. So if you don't mind, like if we were to look at this through the lens of the intergenerational conflict, what would a leader need to be mindful of, to do, to say, to act on in this day and age so that we can manage intergenerational remote conflict or hybrid conflict?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that, I get a lot of, and I always am totally open to, sort of push back when people sort of will say, well, there really aren't a whole lot of differences between the generations. The reality is that, it's more about what age we are, where, our status in life and that sort of thing. And I'm always open to that pushback. But I really have to say, of course, would be a hypocrite if I didn't disagree, because that's what my work is on. And I really do believe that if we take a step back, we really, as a society, really do need to accept that there are differences, right, within generations. I mean, we don't need to spend time today looking at the different ways that each generation, especially the current generation, right, Gen Z or even Alpha, that the upcoming generation, things that they're exposed to, things that they're facing that many of us, even 15, 20 years older than them, never had to face or never dealt with, right? Anything from online bullying to, you know, that's just one great example, but there's a lot of others, right? To just the constant being on, right? Like Susan mentioned, that the idea of logging off, right, for an entire, and I agree. I think the pressure though for a younger person to do that, right, they may not feel as comfortable to say, I'm going to log off all my social, right? And that may come off as, I've talked to students who will say, well, if I'm not on social, people will think I'm strange. And if I'm strange, then I'm not going to have friends and I'm not going to get hired and I'm not going to have this and I'm not going to have that, right? So that's my thing. My thing is all about empathy for anyone that knows a little bit about my work. And I really do believe that if we can put ourselves in their shoes, and that works both ways, right? I think if you're from a Generation Z, then or a millennial or any generation, you need to look at what the individual has gone through, perhaps what the workplace was like, and sort of try to walk a day in their shoes, so to speak. And to Susan's point, I don't think we can do that unless we connect, right? I don't think if we don't connect, if we don't communicate, then I think that's really part of the problem. So, to go back to the very beginning, Susan mentioned someone who might say, like, oh, that young whippersnapper that doesn't, and that's incredibly common in terms of, I'm sure most of us see that. I'm not saying anyone at Bentley does that. I don't think that's the case at all. But it's extremely common. I just faced just yesterday, I had someone say that to me, actually. And that's not going to help, right? That's not going to help bridge the communication. You can get frustrated, right? That's human, that's normal. But you need to come together, right? And try to communicate like you would with someone who's your age or even someone who's, similar to you. And I think that that goes for just people from all different walks of life too, right? We need to come together and try to connect and empathize with them a little bit. So, and be curious about them, respectfully, of course, and try to make that connection. Because if we don't, we're not going to build a bridge. We're just going to, I don't know, blow up whatever bridges are left, I guess, which isn't the most eloquent way of saying it, but I guess that's the best way I can put it. So. But with that being said, I did want to just quickly mention from in the you mentioned our culture, Susan. You mentioned culture and talked a little bit about that. But there was a question I had for you that was about trying to find. Oh, it was about our article, right? You mentioned that leaders are responsible for sort of creating culture. So I was curious about, you talked a little bit about this, but I was curious how you mentioned sort of like a digital lunch and that sort of thing. But I was curious if you had any other specifics in terms of how a leader could go about sort of setting that tone in a hybrid workplace. Like, okay, the digital lunch or checking in, or how can they get to know their employees in that way when it's hybrid or fully remote even.
Yeah, I think we were talking a lot about, so how do they deal with the conflict when it happens, right? So you've gotten to know people, and so what do you do when conflict happens? And so that's the important part is that you have to then pull on the relationships that you have. I want for anyone here who ever felt compelled to have an argument or to give somebody critical, constructive feedback using a written modality to take your hands off of the keyboard. Police. I cannot stress this enough. Do we not all know at this point how little the written word means when you're conveying a message? If it is, if you're giving somebody a message, only 8% of the message sent is going to be received with the words. Eight. That is ridiculous. So you're typing it, and you want to say, I'm going to give you some stuff. You're letting people have 88% of they're going to make it up. You could be saying, well, that was good. And they're going to be like, well, did they say it like that was good? Or, well, that was good. I mean, then there's going to be less than about 20% is going to be the vocal, so we need to hear it. And the rest of it is going to be the visual. So I laugh because I'm still a consultant in my off time and I work in different offices. And when I have one client, there's a guy who's often sending me texts and these questions, and I can see him from where I stand. I mean, I have a standing desk, so I see him, I'm looking at him, I'm like, "Ugh." So when I have a minute, I walk over, I'm like, hey, I wanted to just talk to you. He goes, "Ugh," every time, every single time. Like, what's wrong? He's like, why do you always do that? I said, because I can see you. Because I'm only here a couple of days a week, and if I can see you, I'd love to just have the conversation. It'll probably take 1 second versus me trying to go back and forth, back and forth. And if I could, I would probably give him the constructive feedback of, you should walk over to talk to me too. But if I wrote that, I know that he would make some meaning up. So, may I say, the biggest thing that you can do if you want to manage conflict in this remote hybrid era is to use your eyes to talk as much as your mouth, and definitely not your fingers. Find the time. If somebody is going to be coming into the office soon, because you don't need anything to fester, if it's going to be like within the next 24 hours and you can have that conversation, or with a week if it's something that can wait, then just schedule some time for a little catch up. Hey, let's catch up. I wanted to just go through a few things with you. Don't be afraid. And in that time, you can say, there's a couple of things that I've been thinking about. I wanted to give you some constructive feedback. No problems. Or if it is, there's a couple of things that I needed to give you some feedback on because I'd like for them to change, whatever it's going to be. If you don't have the time to actually see the person in the room, then please, 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 we all have Zoom, Slack, Teams, and if nothing else, you got your FaceTime or whatever it is on an Android phone, get on a video and talk to the person and let them see you so that they can hear with their eyes. We need to see each other as we're giving each other constructive feedback, difficult for conversations, whatever it might be. We need to see each other. I can't, and at the very least, get on a phone. Like the lowest possible denominator, get on a phone call where you can't see each other. But I think that it is, I mean, you could be in the Sahara and have enough of a signal to get on FaceTime at this point. So please, please talk to folks where they can see you when they need to hear what's going on. And along with that, I'm also going to say that please remember as a manager, it is not your job to resolve the conflict all the time. Manager manages conflict. There's that old thing that says, the old adage where if you want a man to be able to feed for himself, you can get him some fish or you can teach him to fish. If we keep getting the fish, if we keep solving the conflict for our people, they will not learn. And so no matter what we were saying earlier, Jeff, people can articulate their emotions and they can tell us how they're feeling. Well, let them learn how to say, when you do this, it makes me feel this. Let them learn how to talk to each other. They need to build the struggle muscles. My generation won't always be here to have those conversations. So let's start having those conversations in person and learn how to talk where we're looking at each other in the eye. And I did look up that stare thing that you're like, yeah, I hear what you're saying there. But we need to be able to look at each other and have a conversation and to say it's going to be all right with our eyes, probably even before we start telling them what's going to change with our mouths. Is there anything else you'd recommend, Jeff?
I don't, like I said, I think that you're 100% right on this, and I think I mean, I think I don't know if it's around if we have any questions because I know we're nearing the end. I think that I mean I couldn't agree more, right, with the idea of communicating, and if it is, even if the individual does give you that gaze, right, that sort of trendy Gen Z gaze, which I think is not unique to Gen Z. I've met some people that fall out of that category that have done that, then just work with it. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And try your hardest to make that make up the groundwork as you can. It's not easy, right? But is it meant to be? Maybe not.
Why it's called work, right? Not play.
Exactly. Hard work.
Hard work. Awesome. Well, I think Laura and Sarah, I think we had those questions planned for each other. We can always feel free to ad lib, but we'd love to offer it up to the audience if there's any questions that we can share our takes on. We can take Zoom, type or talk, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, yeah, feel free to use the chat or feel free to unmute. Any questions? We have about 10 minutes.
A question in the Q&A from an anonymous participant that I can bring into the conversation. And this question is, so as a leader, I have always felt when people do not commit, even when I lead well. So I often struggle to get real commitment. I was curious about, is it clarity, choice, or connection that leads to true commitment at work?
Mm. Want to give that one a go,
If you
Susan,
want to
and see what
start.
you think?
Oh no, I go reverse chivalry on this one. Go for it.
So, if I had to say, so what were the three that they mentioned? Clarity, commitment. No, they want commitment.
Yes, they're looking for real commitment, something a little more than just performative. Curious about if this is to do with clarity, choice, or connection.
So, I mean, my opinion would be, and I do want to, I want to see what Susan says about this one. But for me, my opinion, I really do think that clarity is huge. I think that if people have no sort of where they stand, I think that can make a huge, it's a make or break, right? I think in a lot of ways. It may mean that the person stays unhappy and isn't committed, but maybe they make the move, right? And maybe that ends up not being ideal for you, but if they're not committed, then maybe they're not the right person anyways. And that could be, so that to me, clarity is really always super, super important, maybe even more than connection, depending on the person. So for me, I think clarity is I think connections, I think all of them are massively important. But I think clarity, especially in this day and age, especially in hybrid workplaces, is just so helpful, right? Because people quit, for a variety of reasons, but it's not always the reasons we think, right? And people can sort of quiet quit, like we know, right? And all those sorts of trendy things. So that's my take.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm gonna back up a little and say the first question is, how do you know you're leading well? And I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but I think I'm teaching well all the time. And then I get my sets and I have a whole cadre of students who are like, so that was confusing, or you rushed through that, or blah, blah, blah. So, I'm not saying that what you're doing, any one of us being the you, I'm not saying that what any of us is doing is not doing well. We have best intentions. But if we are truly leading effectively, commitment would likely follow. And so, how can we register or assess or calibrate, intentions versus impact? Are there any check-ins that we can say, okay, like I've been trying this and I'm looking forward to your feedback as me as a manager. You could ask HR to do some sort of anonymous, not a 360 per se, but something where they could collect the feedback for you and you could hear. Maybe there's something that you're doing that is actually turning people off so that they're not committing. So I would do that first check-in to see, if you are truly leading well or if there's something that's a misfire for some of your population. And the other thing you can do is you can ask the group. You can ask on 101s. I mean, I was talking about getting to know people. I personally am a big fan of continuing to have one-on-ones with your team over the course of a quarter, or at least maybe 3 times a year. That'd be a long time to wait to meet with your boss just to have a conversation. But this is a case study, blah, blah, blah. This is what I'm looking to do. What would you suggest would be an approach that I might take that you think would land well with yourself and the team? Make it something that's not immediately about giving you feedback, because that's very dangerous for a lot of people. They're not likely going to give you that feedback one-on-one, but how could I possibly, or what could we do, or what do you think would be effective with your peers? Then they can speak on behalf of. Um, so that would be, the way I would back that up a little bit. And then if you're curious about if it's clarity, choice, or connection that leads to true commitment at work, well, I'm going to just go with it's going to be the triple C's on that one. I think without clarity, there's going to be no way anybody can actually execute. So they're not going to be able to make that happen. And you have to choose if you're going to be engaged or not. It's no fault. I've had people tell me in the past, this place is not for me, and I'll say, okay, I wish you all the best, because I would like for you to choose to work someplace that you're really engaged in working. But if somebody chooses to work with me with the organization, then I don't really think it's a choice. They have to commit. They have to do their best work. Otherwise, why are they there? So I would say it's a triple or nothing on that one. I hope that answers it though. Are there other questions that we can answer? We're always happy to. I have one question for you, Jeff. I didn't mean, again, you stuck with me as your partner. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
know, again, from our signups, and while we may not be seeing them here, we had something like 30 different nations are represented in the signup. So different people are going to watch this from different cultures. From your research, the intergenerational conflict, that sort of thing, are there differences that we can say are measurable or quantifiable between Western culture, like United States culture, or different cultures that might be, listening to this conversation in another time? Anything that we could say we need to be mindful of as leaders to resolve conflict in that hybrid environment?
Yeah, I think that yeah, I think culture is always going to be a big, factor, right? The culture of whether it's the culture of the company, the culture of the country, the culture of the even here in the United States, the culture shifts depending on what state we're in, potentially, right? Or industry we're in. And it's interesting because I have had an opportunity to speak with individuals from the UK and even India, and that have done similar research and looked at, some interesting information about the Gen Z specifically, right? And sort of what that means in the workplace. And a lot of it's similar, a lot of it comes back to the idea, even it may not be as extreme as here in the US, but especially in the UK, I know that one of the top things that the research was showing from the individuals that I spoke with is that the Gen Z workers, again, the emotional aspect, right? The fact that they're much more open and much more, without really much thought. And I think that that actually might have been a little bit more challenging based on the individuals that I was speaking to, right, that had done this mass survey in England and the rest of the UK. And than I think here in America. So I think some of the gaps may even be a little bit wider. But it's always interesting. I mean, think about any of us that work with people from different cultures or different backgrounds, whatever it may be. And this is where I double down on the generations are different, because even in different countries and in different areas, we do see these differences. I remember speaking to somebody from India who was talking a little bit about how, the differences he sees when he returns to India from the younger generations just shocks him, right? Because it was something that he was 30 years older than them or something, and he never would have expected some of the things that they're doing, right? Not in a bad way, but just it just surprised him, right? So I think it's more universal than sometimes we realize. And but I guess it's the level and the specifics. And that's interesting too. You can always dig into, what the research says from particular countries and areas, because there's a lot of people doing some really great work.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I would say from my points of view, both teaching at Bentley and teaching internationally, it's a sign of respect and reverence to some supervisors to say nothing and to accept and go with it. And also it also is a sign of respect to ask. Um, I loved in the past year, I've been able to go with Bentley to Japan, to Kuwait. I have students that come from every continent, I think, at this point, except for maybe uh, uh, South Pole. And I always learn. And I think the most important thing for us to do as leaders is to ask, how is it most comfortable for me to give you feedback? How are you most comfortable seeking clarity? I've never worked with somebody from there. The most amazing gift that we can give ourselves is curiosity and to learn and to continue to grow. Leaders that don't ask questions are stagnant, and organizations that don't learn die. So let's be those leaders, If it's your first time working with somebody from another culture, um, if there's an HR program that helps you to indoctrinate, take that, please, and take it seriously. And then ask your team, ask them and say, in all honesty, I am new. That's the greatest phrase. I am new. Can you help me learn? And can you help me grow? But do we have time for one last question? I see we have a question. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, hi. I have
Hey.
a question that follow up what you just said, Susan. So what about the cultural differences when the person is from the culture that doesn't, where people are not accustomed to ask questions, and
Mhm.
even when the managers ask them questions, how comfortable are they, how would you build trust or, as a manager to the person, to the employee who is from this culture?
Absolutely. It's a great point because you could put someone on the spot and they're going to say, no, it's best for me not to ask that. The true answer is first off, I couldn't blanket statement that answer because every single place is going to be different and then people are different. I would absolutely be seeking out the assistance of if it's I think human resources is an old-fashioned name, but it's the people business. There is likely somebody on that team that can help you acculturate to what it is that you can learn and know and grow. And that you can ask them those questions to say, I'm working in the new culture and I don't understand, or I'm realizing this is an issue. And then we have to be mindful of interacting in a different culture. So we have to change. And it's not. I think it was a good movie. It was a little bit biased. It was produced by the Obamas. It was about a company that did some business in Middle America. And so you learned about how the two sides of the coin were seeing each other. Um, and just remember asking my students about that. My students would say, like, what do you think about that? They said, well, it's portrayed in a strange way. But one cannot go into a new culture and say, I assume and I expect you to perform to my standards my way. There needs to be a learning and a meeting of minds. So I would go to experts in that case and to seek out what you can from auxiliary before you try to apply directly. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. So it's a little bit, it's not the question about the manager working in a new country where
Yes,
he
yes,
has to
yes.
adapt. But here in the United States, he's a manager in the mainstream American culture, and there is this employee from a different culture who,
Mhm.
who might be reserved, who might.
Yes. Okay. And by the way, I think Jeff put on the chat the company I was thinking of. So in that case as well, so now they've come to our culture, and let me use this at Bentley as an example. We will have students, in all honesty, from probably 17 different countries, maybe in one of my classes, which is pretty darn cool. And I will say, okay, so we teach in English. We're going to do it in like even just spelling words like COLOR versus COLOUR, this sort of thing. We have standards. So what cannot change should be clear. These are the expectations. This is what I'm looking for. This is how I'm looking for it to be done. And then I would again look to say, how can I learn about a culture? So if they're not going to teach you, I would do whatever I can, my own due diligence, my own way to learn, so that I can approach and have a conversation that's comfortable. But yes, I would hold them to the expectations that I have. Again, so I didn't mean to say I'm going to bend and change for you. It's going to be more of a learning so that I can accept you and meet you halfway so that our conversations and our communication will probably be more fruitful. And if, by the by, if this is something you actually are dealing with and you'd like to talk further, I hate to say it, Jeff and I are on our summer hours, but I always like to talk with people. So I'd love to, send me an email. We can talk about it offline. I'd be happy to. And Jeff, do you want to add anything to that? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it goes back to what you were saying, just about being curious too, right? And that if you're that's our greatest gift. If we want to continue to learn, if we want to continue to connect, we have to be curious, right? And if we don't, and I think that applies really well to generational differences, as well as similar to the cultural differences. So curiosity maybe it's the key.